The card declined twice. Naomi Carter stood at the register of Blue Pine Diner with her daughter's formula in one hand and her dignity draining out of her in front of a line of impatient strangers. The cashier, a boy barely 20, said it loud enough for the whole store to hear. "Ma'am, I said it's declined. You want to hold up the line all night." Somebody laughed behind her. A woman in a fur-trimmed coat muttered, "Some people shouldn't have kids they can't feed," and didn't even bother to lower her voice. Naomi did not turn around. She had learned, over 3 hard years, that turning around only gave people the satisfaction of watching her face break. So she kept her eyes on the counter, on the tin of formula that cost $11 she did not have, and she said the words she hated most in the world. "I'm sorry. I'll put it back." She walked out of that store with her daughter asleep against her chest, and 11 cents, and one crumpled dollar bill in her coat pocket. The very last of it, the very last thing standing between her and nothing. That was when she saw him. An old man, folded into the doorway of a shuttered pharmacy, coat too thin for the cold, hands shaking around an empty paper cup. Nobody was stopping. Nobody was looking. He was invisible the way she often felt invisible, a person the world had trained itself not to see. Naomi Carter, who had just been humiliated in front of strangers, who had 11 cents and a hungry baby, knelt down in the snow and pressed her last dollar into his trembling hand. "Get something warm," she whispered. "You matter." She did not know his eyes followed her the entire walk home. She did not know that the starving stranger was not starving at all, and that by morning, his men would be standing at her door. If you have ever given something you couldn't afford to lose, if you have ever been mocked by people who had more and understood less, stay with me. Because what happened to Naomi Carter next was not charity, and it was not luck. It was the moment her whole life quietly, permanently changed. Naomi lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the edge of the city, in a building where the heat worked only when it felt like it. She was 26 years old. Her daughter, Zuri, was 14 months old, and had her father's eyes and nobody's last name but Naomi's, because he had left the week she told him she was pregnant and never once looked back. She worked doubles at the diner and cleaned offices on the nights she wasn't scheduled, and still the numbers never lined up. Still there was more month than money. Her grandmother, Miss Odessa, used to say, "A woman who keeps her back straight when her pockets are empty has more wealth than she knows." And Naomi held on to that the way she held on to the thin gold ring on her right hand. Her grandmother's ring, the only thing of value she owned, the one thing she had never once considered selling. Not even the week the lights went out. She smiled at customers who called her girl instead of her name. She apologized for things that were never her fault, for the wait, for the register, for existing too visibly in rooms built for people who were not her. She had gotten so good at disappearing quietly that she almost forgot what it felt like to be seen. But what she didn't know was that the man in the doorway had seen everything. For 100 miles of ocean and 2 generations away from that snowy street corner, there was a boardroom on the 40th floor of the Kang Tower, where silence was a language everyone in the family had been forced to learn. Kang Tae-Min sat at the head of that boardroom by 6 the next morning, dressed like a man who belonged to marble and glass, though the coat he'd worn the night before, thin, worn, deliberately unremarkable, was folded in a garment bag by his office door, still smelling faintly of snow and cheap coffee. Tae-Min was 34. He ran Kang Holdings, the legitimate face of an empire his father had built from something far less legitimate. A network of loyalty, fear, and old debts that still moved through the city's underbelly long after the Kang name had been laundered into glass towers and charity galas. He had inherited both sides of that inheritance, the towers and the men who still called him boss in rooms with no windows. He did not trust easily. He had learned as a boy that people were kind to him because of what his family owned, not because of who he was, and that lesson had calcified into something colder with every year that passed. His mother, Chairwoman Kang Soonja, had raised him on a single principle: loyalty is bought, love is a liability, and a Kang does not need either to survive. That morning, he had gone to the corner of 5th and Delmar dressed as a beggar because a tip had reached him, Someone inside the charity foundation his late father had built, the one that funded soup kitchens and shelters across that district, had been skimming the donations for over a year. Families were going hungry while a board member drove a new car. Tae-Min did not believe reports. He believed what he saw with his own eyes. What he saw was a woman who had nothing, giving away the only thing she had. He had watched hundreds of people walk past him that night. Executives, mothers, men in warmer coats than the one he wore. Every single one of them had looked through him like he was part of the pavement. Then a woman with a hungry baby on her chest. A woman who had just been publicly shamed for being too poor to afford formula, knelt down in the snow and gave him her last dollar. Get something warm. You matter. Nobody had said those words to him. Not like that. Not without an agenda, and longer than he could remember. The room went quiet in his chest the way it never did in the boardroom. By 7 the next morning, 3 black cars were parked outside a laundromat on the edge of the city, and Naomi Carter, still in the t-shirt she'd slept in, opened her door to find 2 men in dark suits, and, standing slightly behind them, a man she did not recognize, clean-shaven now, dressed in a charcoal coat, eyes exactly like the ones that had watched her walk away in the snow. Ms. Carter, the taller of the 2 men said. Mr. Kang would like a word. Her stomach dropped straight through the floor. In her world, men in suits at your door in the morning did not mean good news. They meant eviction. They meant debt collectors. They meant trouble finally catching up to a woman who had spent her whole life running just far enough ahead of it. I don't know any Kang, she said, one arm braced against the doorframe, Zuri balanced on her hip. If this is about money, I don't have any. You can see that for yourself. That was the first mistake everyone in that hallway made, assuming Naomi Carter would shrink. Tae-Min stepped forward before his men could answer, and something in his face made the corridor go still. You don't owe me anything, he said quietly. I came to return something. He held out a folded dollar bill. She stared at it, then at him. Then the memory arrived all at once. The doorway, the paper cup, the trembling hands she had knelt beside in the snow. You, she breathed. You were the man outside the pharmacy. I was. You're not starving. No, he said. I was watching. And you were the only person in that entire city who saw me anyway. The room went silent because everyone understood what he had just admitted. He did not ask her to work for him that morning. He did not offer charity because he understood, in a way few wealthy men ever bothered to, that charity from a stranger can feel like another form of humiliation to a woman who has already been humiliated enough. Instead, he asked her a single question, the kind of question no one had asked her in years. How long have you been carrying all of this by yourself? Naomi did not answer him. She closed the door gently, not out of anger, but because she was not ready to let a stranger see the parts of her that even she tried not to look at directly. But that night, for the first time and longer than she could remember, she did not cry herself to sleep. She lay awake wondering what kind of man notices a woman the rest of the world had trained itself to walk past. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at the diner where she worked. Not cash, which she would have refused, but a formal offer of employment as a personal coordinator at Kang Holdings Community Foundation, the very charity arm that had been quietly bleeding money for over a year. The letter was signed simply, Kang Tae-Min. No explanation. No pressure. Just an open door and a wage that would have taken her 3 years to earn at the diner. She almost tore it up. Pride told her that nothing from a man like that came without a price. But Miss Odessa's voice moved through her, the one that said, Baby, there's a difference between a handout and a door. Don't confuse the two just because you're scared to walk through either one. She took the job. Not because she needed saving. Because, for the first time, someone had offered her work, not pity, and there is a particular kind of dignity in being trusted to do a job well, a dignity Naomi had not tasted in years. The Kang Foundation offices were nothing like the diner. Marble floors so clean they held her reflection. Silence so heavy it felt like a rule rather than an absence of sound. Naomi noticed immediately how differently power moved through a room. Not loud, not demanding, just quietly assumed. The way Tae-Min walked through his own headquarters like a man who had never once had to ask permission to exist in a space. But she also noticed the loneliness underneath it. He ate lunch alone at his desk, untouched trays sent back cold. He did not laugh, not once, not even when his assistant made a joke clearly designed to earn one. He answered his mother's calls standing at rigid attention, like a soldier, though his mother was 4 floors up in the same building. Their first real conversation happened 3 weeks in the stairwell, after Naomi had excused herself from a meeting to keep her hands from shaking. He found her there, back against the concrete wall, breathing like she was trying to hold something in. "You did that in the meeting too," he said. "The apologizing. Before anyone had accused you of anything." "Habit," she said. "I am not asking why you didn't fight back in that boardroom," he said, quiet and direct in a way that startled her. "I am asking how long you have been forced to survive people mistaking your silence for permission." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Nobody had ever said something to her that felt less like flattery and more like being understood. "Since I was 19, she admitted. "Since my own family decided a baby without a ring on my finger made me a disappointment instead of a daughter." He didn't offer comfort. He didn't offer sympathy either, which she was grateful for, because sympathy from strangers had always felt like being examined rather than seen. He simply nodded once, like he was filing the information somewhere it would be respected. "My father built an empire," he said after a moment, "and taught me that love was a transaction. I have not unlearned that as well as I pretend to have." It was the most honest thing either of them had said to a living person in years. Small things followed. He noticed she skipped lunch to save money for Zuri's daycare, and without comment began having the office kitchen stocked with food she could take home, never framed as pity, always framed as "there's extra, someone should use it." She noticed he never smiled at his mother's dinners, but smiled, briefly, unguarded, the one afternoon Zuri grabbed his finger in the office lobby and refused to let go. One evening, after a late board meeting, he found her sitting in his car in the underground garage, hands over her face, shoulders shaking silently. Her landlord had raised the rent. Again, she hadn't asked anyone for a ride. She had simply broken down where no customer could see her. He got in the driver's seat and did not start the engine. He did not ask what was wrong. "You don't have to explain," he said. "You can just sit here." They sat in silence for 11 minutes. It was, Naomi would think later, one of the safest 11 minutes of her adult life. That was the night she noticed the ring he wore on a chain beneath his shirt. Not a wedding ring. Something older. A signet worn smooth by someone else's hand before his. And he noticed, for the first time, the thin gold ring on her right hand that she twisted whenever she was afraid. "My grandmother's," she said, before he could ask. "She raised me after my mother couldn't. She used to say a woman who keeps her back straight when her pockets are empty has more wealth than she knows." "She sounds like she loved you the way you deserve to be loved," he said. "She's the only one who ever did. Until Zuri." He didn't say anything to that. But something in his face told her he understood exactly what it meant to count the people who had loved you correctly on one hand. There was a Sunday, weeks into this quiet unfolding, when Naomi brought Zuri to the office because daycare had closed unexpectedly, and she had no one else to call. She expected to be sent home. Instead, Tae-Min canceled a call with Tokyo and sat on the floor of his own office in a $3,000 suit, letting a 14-month-old stack blocks on his knee while Naomi finished a report at his desk. "You don't have to do this," she said, watching him hand Zuri a block for the 3rd time after she'd thrown it. "I know," he said. "I want to." Later that week, she brought him a container of her grandmother's oxtail stew, the recipe Miss Odessa had passed down like scripture, and watched a man who ate cold catered lunches alone every day close his eyes at the first bite like he'd forgotten food could mean something besides fuel. "My mother has never cooked a meal in her life," he admitted. "Love, in my family, is inherited property and expensive silence. I did not know it could taste like this. Where I'm from," Naomi said, "love smells like a church kitchen on Sunday and sounds like your grandmother telling you to sit up straight. It's loud. It argues with you. It shows up uninvited with too much food. I think that terrifies people like your mother." "It terrifies me a little too," he admitted. "I don't know how to receive something that isn't a transaction." "You don't have to know yet," she said. "You just have to keep showing up. That's the whole secret. Nobody tells you that part. But what she didn't know was that not everyone in the Kang family shared his silence so kindly. Chairwoman Kang Soon-ja had spent 30 years protecting a bloodline she believed was owed to duty, not sentiment. When she learned her son had brought a black American waitress with a child and no family name into the foundation, into his orbit, she did not shout. Kang women did not shout. She simply summoned Naomi to the family estate for tea, the old way, the way that had quietly ended more inconvenient relationships than any argument ever could. The estate sat behind iron gates and pine trees older than the country Naomi had been born in. Inside, the tea was served in silence, and Soon-ja did not raise her voice once as she dismantled Naomi piece by piece. "You understand," Soon-ja said, pouring tea she had no intention of drinking, "that my son carries 70 years of family obligation on his shoulders. A woman who cannot carry that weight does not help him. She becomes another burden he must protect. I never asked him to carry me," Naomi said, steadying her voice the way she had learned to steady it in 100 rooms just like this one, rooms built to make her feel small. "I have carried myself my whole life. I only came here because he offered me work, not a name. And yet here you sit," Soon-ja said, "in a house built on a name, drinking from cups older than your country's founding. Do not mistake his interest in you for something that can survive daylight, Ms. Carter. Shock is not love. It fades the way all novelty fades." Naomi set her cup down without finishing it. "Do not mistake my silence for permission," she said quietly. "I have been dismissed by people with far less power than you, Chairwoman. I am still standing." Soon-ja's eyes flickered, not with warmth, but with something close to reluctant respect, the kind old women give young women who refuse to break the way they were supposed to break. The truth would not stay buried for long after that. 2 weeks later, the Foundation's internal audit finally surfaced what Tae-Min had suspected the night he stood outside that pharmacy. Nearly $2 million diverted from shelter and soup kitchen funding over 18 months, funneled through falsified vendor invoices. The board member responsible was board director Priya Han, a woman who had been engaged to Tae-Min for exactly one broken engagement 7 years prior, and who had never forgiven him for choosing the company's ethics over her family's business interests. Priya was not cartoonishly cruel. She was desperate in the particular way people become desperate when an inheritance they were promised quietly slips away. Her family's shipping business had been failing for years, propped up by the very money she'd been stealing. She had watched Tae-Min build an empire she believed should have partly been hers, and watched him hand kindness to a stranger from a snowy street corner instead. When she learned Naomi had been the one to flag irregularities in a vendor file. Nothing dramatic, just a waitress's practiced eye for numbers that didn't add up, the same instinct that had kept her alive on tip money for years. Priya moved fast and cruel. She leaked a story to the press that Naomi Carter, a Foundation employee with no formal education, was the true architect of the missing funds, planted by Tae-Min's enemies to destabilize the family. She had photos doctored, timestamps altered, enough smoke to make even loyal board members uneasy. "You did not save me," Naomi told Tae-Min the night the story broke, standing in his penthouse with her coat still on, refusing to sit. "You used me. You gave me a job with your name attached to it. And now your name is going to bury me the second it becomes inconvenient." "That's not true," he said. "I am handling it." "You protected my body from the cold that night," she said, voice shaking but not breaking. "But you forgot my dignity the moment it became a liability to your family. You cannot claim what you were not present to protect." He reached for her, and she stepped back. "Power is easy for you," she said. "Staying, really staying, when it costs you something, that's harder. I need to know you're capable of it before I let you anywhere near my daughter's life again." She left that night, not out of hatred, but out of the same dignity that had made her give a stranger her last dollar in the snow. The refusal to accept being handled, even by someone she had begun, quietly, and against her own caution, to love. He thought he was protecting her by handling the scandal quietly, behind closed boardroom doors, the way his family had always handled things. He was wrong. The gala came 9 days later, the Kang Foundation's annual benefit, The same event where Priya Han planned to formally present her fabricated evidence to the full board and the city's press, cementing Naomi's public ruin and, by extension, ending whatever chance she and Tae-Min had left. Naomi almost didn't go. She had every reason to disappear back into the version of her life where powerful families never noticed her at all. But Miss Odessa's voice found her again that morning, folding Zuri's tiny socks with hands that had survived worse rooms than a ballroom. You don't walk away from a fight you already won just because they made it loud, baby. She wore her one good dress, the one with a zipper that stuck slightly at the ribs, her grandmother's ring on her finger, and walked into the Kang Foundation gala without an invitation and without an escort. The room noticed her the way rooms like that always noticed her, with a pause, a whisper, 100 eyes doing the arithmetic of who she was and what she was worth. Priya was mid-sentence at the podium, gesturing toward a printed slide with Naomi's photo on it, when Naomi walked straight down the center aisle. "You should finish your sentence with me standing here," Naomi said, loud enough for the microphones to catch it. "It's only fair, since it's my name you're using." The room went silent. "I am not standing here because he chose me," Naomi said, turning to face the crowd of donors, board members, and cameras. "I am standing here because I finally chose myself. I have spent my whole life apologizing for existing in rooms that were never built for someone like me. I am done apologizing tonight." She laid out, plainly and without theatrics, the vendor discrepancies she had flagged months earlier, timestamps that predated her employment entirely, invoices tied to shell companies registered under Priya Han's cousin. She had kept copies. She had learned, the hard way, that women like her could not afford to trust powerful rooms to remember the truth on her behalf. "I know what it feels like to be accused of something you didn't do by people who have more money than truth," Naomi said. "I will not stand here and let another woman go hungry because someone with more power decided her story mattered less than mine." It was Chairwoman Kang Soonja, seated in the front row, who rose first, not to defend her son, but to speak. "I tested this woman myself," Soonja said, her voice carrying the particular authority of someone who had never once needed to raise it. "I told her love in this family does not survive daylight. She told me she had survived worse rooms than mine while still standing. I believe her more than I believe the woman at that podium." Priya's composure finally cracked, and in the scramble to explain the falsified documents, she said enough. About the shipping company's debts, about years of resentment, about a man who had chosen ethics over her, that security did not need to ask her twice to step down from the stage. Tae-Min crossed the room to Naomi's side, but he did not speak for her. He simply stood beside her, close enough that the room understood exactly where his loyalty stood, and let her finish. "You protected my body that night in the snow," she said to him quietly, once the room had returned to its stunned murmuring. "And tonight you finally protected my name without trying to speak for me. That is the difference between rescuing someone and respecting them. I am not your weakness," she added, loud enough now for the cameras still rolling nearby. "I am your equal. If this, whatever this is between us, is going to survive, it starts there, or it doesn't start at all." Tae-Min, who had spent 34 years being taught that love was a liability and loyalty was bought, took the signet ring from the chain around his neck, the one that had belonged to his father, the one thing in that gilded family that had never been bought, only inherited, and did not place it on her hand. He simply held it out to her, open-palmed. "This is not a proposal," he said, quiet enough that it was only for her. "It's a promise that I am done handling you like something to be managed. I want to earn the right to ask you properly, when you are ready to believe me." Naomi looked at the ring in his hand, and then at her own grandmother's ring, worn thin with survival, still on her finger where it had always been. "Then earn it," she said, slowly, "the way you'd earn anything worth having." She did not take the ring that night, but she did not walk away from him either. This was never just a story about a powerful man rescuing a woman from the cold. Naomi Carter did not need rescuing. She had already survived every version of invisible this world had thrown at her, alone, with a baby on her hip and a ring on her finger that reminded her exactly where her strength came from. What she needed was not saving. She needed to be seen, respected, and never again mistaken for someone whose silence meant permission. And Tae-Min's arc was never really about power at all. A man who inherits everything can still inherit nothing that matters. No one who tells him the truth. No one who wants him instead of his name. The real twist of this story was never the money, or the mafia ties, or even the scandal at the gala. It was two people who had both learned to survive by disappearing. One behind wealth, one behind poverty, finally choosing to be fully, dangerously visible to one another. Was his protection romantic, or was it, in the beginning, another form of control? Did the chairwoman deserve forgiveness for testing a grieving young mother the way she did? And when Naomi refused the ring that night, was that strength, or was it fear dressed up as dignity? I want to know what you think. Was Tae-Min right to hold back his defense of her that night, and let her speak first, or did he wait too long to protect her name? Was Chairwoman Sunja wrong for testing Naomi the way she did, or was it the only honest thing anyone did in that entire family? Drop your city, your local time, and one word for how this story made you feel. I read every comment, and your reactions genuinely shape the next story I write. If Naomi's line, "I am not standing here because he chose me. I am standing here because I finally chose myself," hit you the way it hit me while writing it. Like this video, subscribe, and tell me which moment stayed with you the longest. This is only the beginning of their story.